But you told us, dear scientists, that the quantum state of a field cannot be reproduced. So you already have discovered that there are things in the world, in the physics, that cannot be reproduced in a laboratory. So with this view, you can understand exactly why we are the way we are. We are the way we are because we are parts whole of the universe, exactly like each cell of my body is a part whole of my body.
Okay, Federico, thank you for taking the time to meet with us. I've read your books and your podcasts, and I am an enormous, I have to say, a fan right from the beginning. Um, and to give you a little context of what we're trying to achieve here, the notion of the podcast is first principles first, and it's motivated by a background. I have a background in artificial intelligence and linguistics. It goes quite way some way. And we're seeing in the current discussion, that discussion of what constitutes intelligence, what constitutes agency, what constitutes life, is really sort of not very well informed, and that it's not based upon a fundamental understandings, and that our fundamental understandings of what constitutes intelligence or sentience or consciousness, I think, is rapidly evolving, and I think you're one of the leading lights in providing this new direction. Um, and what we are looking at and we're engaged with is that what's the possibility of creating intelligent agents, and what is it possible to actually incorporate some of these principles that you elucidate into the design of new kinds of models and new kind of agents, but also it spills over into new kinds of cultural institutions. It's a fundamental change that we're going through here. Um, and one way of thinking about it, and we can go in more detail later, is there's a transition. I don't know if you heard the term, the Anthropocene, the period of the Earth in which was shaped by human actions, to something what James Lovelock called the Novocene, um, in which he was, you're familiar with that, yeah. And I think it's that fundamental, and our whole predicates of how we see ourselves in the world and our position on the planet is changing, and I think it's that the insights and the structure and the way that you're thinking about it can inform that. And we're interested in sort of what is the science of consciousness, what is, and how does that inform our new ways of thinking ourselves and ordering ourselves and creating new kind of norms and cultural norms around us. So I will stop with that. And what I would appreciate is you have an incredible backstory, life story, how you got to. It's on you. We've interviewed, I should say, Chris Fields, who is an information quantum information theorist. We've had Carl Friston, a neuroscientist. We had Don Hoffman, who I think you know well. Um, and also we have Michael Levin, did an interview with him, the biologist from Tufts. And Michael has many some ideas that I think overlap with yours. More recently, we just Mitch Radcliffe, Will Radcliffe, who's a biologist. Um, and so out of that, out of these interviews, we're seeing a common thread start to come. People have different points of view, but is consciousness fundamental? Is information fundamental? Are we moving away from a reductionist mentality? So I'll just tee it up there, and because I think your personal experience and how you describe that is very powerful, and it's very relevant to how one sees these things. So I'll leave it with that.
So, yeah, thank you, John, for your introduction. My experience really starts as a physicist, and as such, I understood reality from the point of view of space, time, matter, and energy. At the time when I was studying neuroscience, at one point, I asked myself, since in these books I was reading, they were always talk about electrical signals, biochemical signals in the brain, and they were explaining, a conscious experience in that way. They never mentioned consciousness. Of course, those books, consciousness was a forbidden word, talking about 40 years ago. And And so I asked myself, well, wait a second, they describe this, the taste of chocolate by electrical signals. But how can the taste of chocolate be electrical signals or biochemical signals, whatever signals? You know, and, and I asked to one of our scientific advisors in the scientific advisory board that I had at that time, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about this. Are you talking about consciousness?" I said, "Yeah, I think so. I think that's consciousness." "Oh, don't worry about it, Dad. Well, it's something that happens in the brain. We'll figure it out, sometime in the future. But don't worry about it. That's not what's going on, right?" So okay, but being a hard-nosed scientist, I say, well, if it is true that the brain as a information processing system, works like a computer. That's what they tell us. Then I should be able to make a computer that actually, has consciousness. So let me try to figure it out, because I try to prove my statement. So I started thinking about it and thinking about it, and the more I think, the more impossible the problem is. And it's very simple. There is nothing in physics, and I know physics pretty well, nothing in physics that can tell you how to convert electrical signals or biochemical signals or anything signal into sensations and feelings, which is what David Chalmers called qualia. He was the one that brought this our problem of consciousness to the attention of science about 7 years later. And, and it properly so, he made it clear that that is an unsolved problem in science, that we cannot just claim that, it is the consciousness is a phenomenon of the brain when we have no idea of how the brain could transform signals into sensations and feelings, into qualia. And of course, I couldn't even, if could I make a robot that has an AI brain, but also sensory and actuators, in order to interact with the world? Could that become conscious? And you know, how can it become conscious if there is nothing in physics that tells you what consciousness is? And so that was the beginning of my introduction to consciousness. But because at that time I was also unhappy, unhappy of my life, despite having achieved everything that should make me very happy. That was a problem of consciousness, by the way. So, an inner problem of consciousness, where the outer problem of consciousness I was trying to solve with a computer was another problem of consciousness. And I wanted to understand what consciousness is, and I was really wanted to know. And it was in this climate that I had an extraordinary experience of consciousness that changed completely my idea of what consciousness is. And it propelled me into the study of consciousness. And this experience had this strength. It was not just an experience that gave me some information, some meaning, not just information, meaning, which I will get to meaning later. But also it gave me the motivation to continue to pursue the understanding of what I got a glimpse of through this experience. And so this experience essentially made me feel like, first of all, my consciousness was inside my body and outside my body. So if the consciousness is produced by the brain, how can the consciousness be outside the body? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. How can the feeling of love, feeling of joy and peace and this white scintillating light, that it was me, because it was my consciousness that has those properties, it was outside of me. How is that possible? Right? So, clearly, if that happens, either you go to see a psychiatrist, or else, which will certainly give you a few pills, but it will not solve your problem, or you try to solve it yourself. And since I have learned by being an entrepreneur that I have to take responsibility for what happens to me, and not blame somebody else, I decided that I'm going to figure it out. And now I'm happy to say that there is a major step forward in understanding the nature of consciousness. So consciousness is a property that must.
You have described it as something that came right out of you, and that you were the observer and the observed,
Yes.
and that was like a very powerful experience. That's a very powerful way of describing it. And
Yes.
it was just it just was an explosion outside of yourself, and a force, and it was light, and then you felt something like you'd never felt before. I mean, and
Yeah.
that's it's extraordinary. I mean but the observer and the observed and being both is I
Yeah.
think
But
sort of the paradox.
essentially, when when in this experience, I did, since everybody asked me the same, and I'm tired of. I'm tired of repeating this thing. So I try to to kind of short. But if you want, I can give you the full the full experience. Uh, it's up to you. I mean, because it's another 5 minutes, and I would like to go to the to go forward. But let me know. I mean, if you want, I.
Go no, go for it. I don't mean to interfere with that. It was just a very powerful statement.
Yeah, I mean, no, no. Let me asking you. It's fine with me if you want to. I give you the the full account of the experience. It's fine with me. So
Okay, I think that would be helpful. I mean, it was
okay,
so
it's
powerful and
fine. So
formative, and the way
you can cut the.
I heard you describe it is so strong,
Yeah,
and
yeah. No, it's fine. So you can forget what I said earlier. You pick it up from here.
okay.
So my desire to understand the nature of consciousness was strong enough that it brought an experience, an extraordinary experience that happened in 1990. I was in Tahoe on vacation, and so skiing during the Christmas holidays. So that was the only vacation that I took in that time, being a CEO of a company. And, and one night I woke up at around midnight. I was thirsty, went to get a glass of water, went back to bed, just waiting to go back to sleep, just, very quiet. And all of a sudden, from my chest, it, a beam of energy, a couple of feet wide, comes out of me is light, white scintillating light, and is love. The love was so powerful. It was like 10,000 times, 100,000 times the any love that I felt. But it was unconditional love. It wasn't toward anybody. It was me, because the consciousness in this energy was my consciousness. It was outside, gushing outside of my body. So, wow. And then it blows up, and it covers all the space, and now I am in everywhere, and there is this light, white scintillating light everywhere. So, I am observing myself, because who am I? I'm the conscious entity that observes. So I'm observing myself. I am the observed and the observer all at once. My body was hot, vibrating, but also kind of vibrating like points of vibration, like the cells were vibrating echoing the vibration of the light, this scintillation that I saw in the light. There was love and peace and joy, and the peace was, I never felt peace before, because that was me. I finally met who I am. This stuff, which I thought this is the stuff that everything is made of. This is the primal energy out of which space, time, matter, and energies are made. I mean, that's the way it was a clear thought that emerged. But even before that thought, that's me. And so, I was at peace finally. I was at home. You see what I mean? At home. This is my home. This is me. And clearly, an experience like this changes completely the perspective that I had. Before, I was separate from the world. Now I am the world, observing myself with my point of view. So I'm a point of view of the world, the universe, upon itself.
Isn't that's like near death experiences that other people have had? I mean, you hear the similar kind of description.
In many ways, yeah, in many ways, but fortunately, it was not, because I was clinically dead. So I was I was I was the most alive that one can be. So so at that time, for me that was a, I call it the awakening, because it was indeed awakening to, just like you awake, you are in a dream and you think you are the character in the dream, and then all of a sudden when you awake and you see that you realize that you were dreaming, it's a little bit like that. It was like, no, I'm not that, I'm this other thing. Because it was not an imagination, it was a real stuff. It was, it was more real than reality. So how can I doubt that self-evidence that comes with that experience? When you have this direct type of conscious experiences, you know that you know, and also you also know that you don't know. There are many things in the experience that I couldn't fathom. How is that possible? But that experience had the energy to propel me for the rest of my life. I'm still living off that propulsion, that need to understand that came with that experience, and that's 35 years later. And 35 years later, and now I can explain it much better than I could, understand it then. But I'm actually explaining what happened. I am a field. I am not the body. I am a field that can know itself, that can self-reflect. This energy that feels like loves, peace and joy. That energy is who I am. Is who we are. And if we allow ourselves to see who we are, then you meet who you are. You are home. So but as a physicist, for me it was wow. I mean, this is not what I was taught. So what's wrong with this picture, or what's right with this picture? And in fact, it was for the first time that I felt that there was something right that I had to understand, and to explain that the previous view was wrong. And it took me 20 years of personal work, at 30-40% of my time, to arrive at the point where it was clear that consciousness and free will, because consciousness and free will go hand in hand, they cannot be separated. And of course, it is the consciousness with free will is self-consciousness. You know what you want, and so but you also have the will to pursue what you want. So because if you had consciousness without free will and you knew what you want, then it would be a joke that the universe is playing on you. You know what you want, but you cannot do anything about it because you don't have any free will. I mean, that would be crazy if you think about it. But most scientists today are telling you that there is no free will, or everybody knows that there is no free will. Well, I don't believe so. In fact, I believe that if you start with consciousness and free will, you can actually explain why we have to have quantum physics. Quantum physics has exactly the properties needed to express in the material world the capacity that we have to understand, to know ourselves, and to direct our own experience. So that's what this new theory is saying. And the reason, we can go into the details, but if you start by saying consciousness and free will must be present at the beginning of the universe as fundamental properties of the universe, of one, the totality of what exists, then we can explain why there has to be quantum physics, why there has to be classical physics, why we have to have the world that we know, and also why do we have to have an interiority, not just an exteriority, but an interiority. Quantum physics is about interiority. Quantum physics is like the mind aspect of a triune reality where we have body, mind, and spirit. A triune reality where we have body, mind, and spirit. The body is classical physics. The quantum physics is the mind of the universe, and the spirit is the meaning of information, the meaning of our experience. Qualia is the bringer of meaning. That's part of the mind. But the deeper part of who we are is the meaning. In physics, there is only information without meaning.
Could you elaborate on what you mean, the meaning instead of that? What is meaning irreducible?
Meaning is the ultimate objectivity of one. Meaning is what one goes after. Meaning, meaning is the essence of what it means to know yourself. Is the meaning of who you are, the meaning of your life, the meaning of your experience. I mean, if we feel love, love is the feeling, but that feeling brings a meaning. The meaning of who you are, who the other person is, why you feel this feeling with the other person. That's the meaning. The meaning is not even discussed. The meaning, but the meaning is what we use information for. And in physics, there is no meaning. It's only information. Information is only a probability that a symbol appears or not in a sequence of symbols, or an event appears or not. That's what information is in science. There is no meaning in the information.
Are you familiar with this? Stuart Hoffman goes from matter to meaning. Have you heard him talk about that? I mean, there are, but I'm not sure that he has the same notion of consciousness that you do.
Yeah, I don't, clearly he also thinks that consciousness is much more fundamental than what, most scientists make. Like, most scientists talk about an emergent property of the brain, or even worse, an epiphenomenon of the brain. And of course, it has to be, if there is no free will, then consciousness, if it emerges from the brain, is an epiphenomenon, because it means it cannot have causal power. To have causal power means you have to have free will. Otherwise, there is no causal power. In fact, the free will is the causal power of the quantum fields that, interacting with each other, create this physical reality. You see, basically, I'll give you a snapshot of the theory, so that we have at least a kind of an overview. Then we can go into the detail. But the theory is saying the following: a quantum field is generally in a quantum state that evolves in time. Evolves in time. But the time in which the quantum state evolves is not the time that we call time. It's not the time in the space-time. Is a parameter in quantum physics. It's not the time of space-time. Okay, so there is a quantum field, a quantum state, sorry, in the quantum field, and this quantum field can only be expressed with a vector in n-dimensional space, in which the components of the space are complex numbers. So they're not real numbers, they're complex numbers. So you have a vector with n complex numbers, and that evolves in time, where time is a parameter, is changing, is a dynamic state. Now, in this new theory, that state of the field has exactly the same properties of a conscious experience, because that state must obey the no cloning theorem, and the no cloning theorem says that you cannot reproduce this state. This state, if it can be known, it can only be known by the field. Is a private property of the field, exactly like my experience or your experience. You are the only one that can know your own experience. Number two, if you make a measurement, at the most you can measure 1 bit per quantum bit. And the quantum bits that are the way you can express in quantum information, you can express the state of the field. But the quantum bits are entangled. So the entanglement is a property that connects the quantum bits in ways that the classical bits are not connected. The classical bits are individually separate from each other, just like the bodies in classical physics. But in quantum bits, the quantum bits they have states in common that must be, to represent them, you need an n-dimensional space. You cannot represent them in space and time. So that quantum state cannot exist in space and time. It must exist in a deeper reality. So now we can say then that if consciousness exists, you start by saying consciousness exists. Why? Because we know they exist. Each one of us is conscious. So do we need more proof than that? Okay, so if we start there with a postulate that is self-evident, because everyone has the evidence within ourselves, We start there and we say, well, then where in the world is there anything similar? The quantum state of a field. The quantum state of the field is private. You can only know a small portion of what the field feels, because that, then I'm saying, well, then the field is actually having an experience of its own state. So qualia are defined as the field, the field having an experience of this quantum state, and the experience. So the mathematics gives you a vector, but the vector is the representation of ontology, and the ontology is the experience of your own state. In other words, the representation is the map, and the experience, which is the qualia that you feel, that's the territory. Okay? It's a big difference. A theory of reality is not reality. And the simulation of a theory of reality is even further removed from reality. And today, most people say that a simulation of a theory of reality is reality. Are we kidding? Are we kidding? You see? So anyway, so now if we accept then that the field is conscious because his state has the same property, the privacy and the fact that you can only know a small portion of what you feel. The love that I feel when I communicated with classical symbols, and I say to my son, I love you, am I expressing all that I feel? Not a chance. It's not even close. I mean, we cannot transfer what we feel to another person. We can translate it, symbolically, but the translation represents a much less than what we feel. In my feeling, I know that I don't know. How the hell can the computer know that it doesn't know? I mean, I know that I don't know because the feeling is not a number, and the meaning is even less than a number. Meaning has nothing to do with numbers. That the inner reality cannot be represented by number. That's why it can be represented by probabilities. And probabilities are not numbers. Even if you say it's a number, it can be represented by a number between 0 and 1, but the probability is not a real thing. It's a product of consciousness. Only consciousness could imagine a concept called probability, which is trying to predict something that is important to the conscious being that wants to understand the future. But if I give you quantum physics describes the world as probabilities, is that the description of reality? No. Classical physics tells you the velocity, the position, tells you the force, gives you number for all these quantities. Now, quantum physics. Quantum physics gives you a probability distribution, and they cannot tell you which one of the many possibilities will manifest. The manifestation requires the collapse of the wave function, as it's called, meaning you go from a probabilistic representation to an actuality, which is what you measure with the instrument. Well, what is going on there? In this theory, if the field is conscious, then the field that you are observing is the one that decides what to show up, what to manifest. So the collapse of the wave function is exactly a decision of free will of the field that you are observing, not of the observer. Not of the observer. The consciousness of the field that you are observing, which decides what to show up. So now we start with a field that has consciousness and free will. And that's the theory. And this theory I did with a professor of quantum information, which is one of the top authority in the world. He has shown that you can derive all the equations of quantum physics starting with qubits. So quantum information is even more fundamental than quantum physics. So you can derive all the formalism from interaction of quantum bits, but now now this is a step forward, because now we say this quantum state represents qualia, the qualia of a conscious experience, can then, which allows us to interpret the collapse of the wave function as a decision of free will. And now we can go beyond, because qualia are just the entry into the inner sanctum of the universe, the entry into the world of meaning, because qualia are the carriers of meaning. So we go from numbers out there in the classical world. Bits that's why we can represent everything or do simulation with bits. We go to qualia, which are not numbers. They are probabilities that manifest into an experience which carries a meaning. So there is all kinds of physics now that we don't know at all that could describe some of the stuff that happens between qualia and meaning, which is the ultimate, the essence of what knowing is.
How does your theory relate to what Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff are talking about? It sort of the objective, sort of orchestrated objective reduction. The whole idea. I mean, he makes similar points that it is irreducible, it's not computable. I think we had Stuart was one of our on a podcast and talking about microtubules as being quantum in quantum state, and that arguably that the transition between the quantum and the classical is out of that comes consciousness, and then out of that sort of comes life. Is that similar to what you're saying, or is
No, because no, it's very different, because I start with consciousness. You cannot explain consciousness. You have consciousness. It is from the very beginning of the universe. The universe is conscious
well,
and has free
or,
will.
maybe
So you
I mean,
no,
well, I'm not trying to explain that.
it's very, John, is very important, because they are talking as if consciousness was the result of a mechanism, the result of a functioning. That is not at all what consciousness is. Consciousness is a fundamental property of one, of the totality of what exists. And you cannot explain it with anything. It is consciousness that can explain, not vice versa. You see, let me consciousness creates mathematics, not the other way around. So how can mathematics explain consciousness?
Well, I agree. I mean, but I think there is a way of looking at that. Is as you have said, you may have so that the universe is a way of understanding itself, it's knowing itself, expressing itself.
That's right. And to know itself, it must be conscious. So from the very beginning, the energy that is the universe, one energy with incredible properties. One of the properties, which is a capacity to self-reflect, to know itself. We have to start there. We cannot explain that. You know, even if you had a mathematical formula, that how can the mathematical formula become ontology? You see, the ontology of the universe is that the universe can know itself.
The way I would explain that is I can see what you're saying, but it is a way I may have consciousness manifesting itself in the intersection between the two, and that is what life is. Is life is consciousness expressing itself at different scales and different.
That's okay. So the theory of Hameroff Penrose, at the best, they are explaining one of the possible mechanisms with which the conscious fields communicate with the body, with the physical body. Okay. So that may be one of the many possible ways. But they are not explaining consciousness. They're not even giving you a theory of consciousness. You see? It's not a theory of consciousness.
No, I see the difference. I mean, and so you also mentioned John Wheeler and sort of the from uh, in his theory of participant, yeah, from bit, and that was you said it should be a qubit. I can see that.
Yeah, it should be a qubit. But actually, the the I did not do the work to show that quantum bits can explain, for Dirac equation, that from the interaction of quantum bits based on what we know about quantum bits, you can show that from there comes the equation, so that information is deeper even than the expression, mathematical expression that derives from it. That's Professor Dariano, which is we collaborated together to get this theory, but it's not my work. That's his work, and is a seminal work, because he really shown that John Wheeler was right. His intuition was correct, that information is more fundamental than matter.
So, are there other physicists like Lenny Susskind and his notion of a holographic universe, and his notion of the second law of quantum complexity? Is that in the same general area of your thinking?
Well, my thinking requires, in a way, that the universe be holographic, which of course is what physicists have also found out, that quantum information is holographic, and also fractal, meaning that there be the same model represented at various scales. And in fact, it is almost a necessity, because if one wants to know itself, and and it has the capacity to know itself, it follows that whatever organization is within the meaning of one, because what does it mean to explain, to know, getting the meaning of who you are, that meaning must be holographic and fractal. In other words, because otherwise there would be an infinity of possibilities. It would be impossible to know yourself. But if you have a fractal structure, then it is possible to know yourself, because you are repeating a model which is potentially infinite, but at least that model is repeated at different scales, instead of everything is different. It's not, that would be like, right, trying to understand a chaotic system where there are not even laws, and things happen, and it's impossible to know. There is no rhyme and reason. The fact that the universe is obeys laws, certain aspects of the universe, not everything, because there is free will, as I mentioned. And in fact, quantum physics, which is the physics, the more fundamental physics, in this case, the superposition of states will be the mental aspects of the universe, which actually can dream up possibilities. And the possibilities that you dream up, they're not realized yet, so they can be in superposition. You can have a cat that is both, dead and alive in your thoughts, but in reality, no. In reality, it's either alive or dead. So you can explain, why you have superposition of states in quantum physics, because quantum physics doesn't represent reality, the physical reality that we can measure and touch, with our bodies and so on. It only represents the mental aspects of reality, which is, one of the three aspects that you have to start with. They don't come out later. The spiritual element, the mental element, and the physical element represent three different aspects that must coexist, and they are not separable. They are irreducible. That is the theory. Okay, so you don't, it's not like, but how do you explain? No, they must all be there, because classical information is what you need, is information that can be shared, because the inner information cannot be shared. You can only share something, and the something that you can share is classical information. Not only that, but also the experience keeps on changing. So where is the memory of your prior experience? You have to put it into memory in something that is lasting. That's matter, right? Matter can last for a long time. So the classical world is required both for memory of the experience, of the knowing, and the symbols that you need to use to communicate with the fields need to communicate with other fields. They need to communicate with this type of information that is shareable, because you cannot express the field directly. And this is, so we put together many of the incomprehensible aspects of quantum physics, because people, I have to take stock of the fact that the quantum state cannot be reproduced. But why does it not? I mean, the bits of the computer can be reproduced. The program and the data of a computer can be reproduced. Why can we not reproduce quantum information? What's the reason? Because it represents the conscious experience of the fields that cannot be reproduced. You see, so it all makes sense, but people will refuse because they are so fossilized on the idea that there is only matter, space, and time, and everything else, is kind of epiphenomenal, that we cannot get out of this pickle in which we are. But if we do, we then realize that we have it all wrong, and that we have to really substitute cooperation to competition. Today, we have a physics that justifies competition, but the real reality justifies only cooperation, only working together, only resonating
That's
and
true
working
biology.
together.
We talked to biologists. I will say it's true biology. So endosymbiosis and the whole idea of what keeps things alive is sort of is not a pure not a winner take all, but actually, it is a method of cooperation. It's sort of the
Yeah.
golden rule. So there are fundamental principles that we're discovering that are what it means to be alive and keep things alive and grow complexity. And my thinking, just to run this by you, is do you think that there's an evolution of thought and consciousness, that we are evolving and we're developing new forms that allow us to discover and reify these truths in new kinds of technologies? So we'll be moving away from the materialistic, the reductionistic, because it doesn't explain things. It is inadequate, and we're developing new forms that embody these principles, and we're moving
Mhm.
into a new era of that. To me, it's a new set of design principles for how to think about living things, what life is, what your part of life is, how you build institutions, and within this framework. Rather than being extractive, right now the climate change is an extractive, reductive notion that doesn't acknowledge the interdependencies of living things, and we have to reestablish a scientific foundation to understand that, to build institutions in that frame. Do you think that is feasible? Or you
Yeah,
think that's the direction?
I'm in agreement with that view that
Yeah.
we are simply first of all, we are not the body. We are a field
Right. Right.
controlling the body.
Right.
The body
Right.
is like a drone. The body is not
Right.
conscious, qua body, nor does it have free will, qua body. But the field is conscious and has free will. So what I perceive as my body free will is really the free will of the field that I am. So when the body doesn't exist anymore, the body is temporary, just like an electron can be emerged, emerges as a state of the field, or is reabsorbed by the field, but the electron is not separate from the field. Our body is not separate from the field that we are. The same way, except the field is a much more sophisticated structure than the field of electrons. But the field of electrons is conscious. It's, it communicates with what we call electrons. The electrons are states of the fields. They're inseparable from the field, just like the waves of a sea are inseparable from the sea. The property of the electrons are the property of the field. So if we attribute consciousness to the field of electrons, the the electron may share that consciousness, but it's a kind of since it can come and go, the consciousness is really the property of the field. In any event, if we say the electron is conscious, well, it is conscious, but it doesn't have free will. The free will is not in the electron because the electron is not even a particle separate from the field. So how can he have free will? Do what he wants? He cannot. So basically it is an expression of the field. The properties of the electrons are the properties of the field. So in this view, then reality is there is nothing material in the sense that we imagine matter. Space and time are constructs of our consciousness that experiences this conscious field that experiences the reality perceived by a system which is a machine, is a quantum classical system, is a machine that we created. We fields collectively created this. We have created life, these bodies, in order to have instruments to know ourselves through these instruments. And so we are in a stage right now in humanity where, having created something which is an imitation of intelligence, this is an indication that we have reached a threshold in our evolution where we got to go beyond this. It's just the fact that we finally we have succeeded in creating something that looks like us, but it's not us. It cannot ever be us, because a machine, a classical machine, cannot be conscious, because it lacks the inner experience that only the computer can know. If you can copy the bits and the data of a computer, you have copied what a computer is. You can copy and put it into another computer. You cannot copy me and put it into another human being.
Well, you talked about Satie, I guess is the term you use, and
A quantum computer, John, a quantum computer, will have a consciousness associated to its operation when it is in a pure quantum state, which is when it does the computation, which is not done in this space and time. In this space and time, we have the answer, but the computation is done in this deeper reality, quantum reality, and there is a conscious state for that time, but there is no free will. So it's not a field. The quantum computer is not a field. It's not an expression of a field. You see, where our body is, because our body is the field can communicate directly with this body. It may be possible that our field could communicate with the computer directly in the future. Conceptually, that would be possible, and so we will save to have to to transform, but to transform the from quantum to classical, we could use particles, states that are quantum states, but excited quantum states, in order to communicate with this physical structure. That is possible, but it will be no better than our body. Our body is already a quantum classical system that communicates with the field and has the capacity to do unbelievable things. And notice that the body is holographic in the very precise sense that each cell of my body, each part, contains the whole, where the whole is the genome of the egg that created all the cells of the body. So the genome is the potentiality of the organism that existed in that first cell, that then was copied in each of its parts. So we have 30 to 50 trillion parts. Each part has the potential knowledge of the whole, which is the whole body in this case, the whole organism. Computers are not built that way. If we want to control a system with a field, it must be built like our body. And quantum computers are not made of this type of part.
Wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, if you wanted to build a synthetic intelligence that it should be holographic and should have those. Do you think it's possible to create those properties in a synthetic? Build something that has those properties with it? I mean, is that?
It may be possible to go much beyond what we can do with classical computers, but the crucial difference is the free will. The free will goes beyond. The free will is a property of that field that has to go together with the consciousness to become self-conscious. So that a quantum computer is deterministic, just like a classical computer. It cannot have free will. We don't want the computer to have free will. They want to do what we want them to do, not to decide that to go on their own. so so um, so a quantum computer is deterministic. The algorithms that we want them to to elaborate, to process, all those algorithms are all deterministic algorithms. The Hamiltonians are they are deterministic in the probability space. Obviously, it's not probabilistic in the sense that they but they regulate the evolution in time of the state of the computer, but then the solution is one of the possible states that the computer could get to, and except we create the computer in such a way that there is a very high probability there is only one state that will be the correct, the one that we can measure. But but the the computer is deterministic. There is no difference in terms of determinism versus indeterminism between the quantum computers and the classical computers. We want, so neither computer has free will, and without free will, then even if there was consciousness, it's not a consciousness that can be associated to an entity that can drive its own will. There is no will. This basically is a machine.
One of the things that you've said and I think it's important, is to the evolution of our understanding is to get rid of the ego concept, to be able to that the concept of the ego is an artifact of our our current sort of materialistic space-time mentality, and that can be that can be a big problem if because you impose an ego perspective, a closed world view on something that tries to contain it, and that leads to fundamentalism, orthodoxies, and things. So, what you how to keep from a new cultural perspective, how you keep sort of an open loop learning that there's it never is contained with any particular manifestation. I mean, would you concur with that or modify that, or because I think that becomes really important for us going forward as and trying to make it survive our transitions that we're going through with respect to climate change, all these other things we're having to deal with.
Yeah, I agree. The ego, the way I look at the ego is that portion of the consciousness of the field that is identified with the body. Okay, so that is only a very small portion of that consciousness. So I don't see that as who we are. We are temporarily we think that we are the body, and and we forget about who else we are. But that's part of the design of having an experience in this reality in order to know ourselves. But when I say to know ourselves, it's not the ego that wants to know itself. It's the consciousness, the self, what I call Satie, the vaster Satie that wants to know itself, not the ego. The ego kind of is supposed to express in this reality the aspect of the Satie that the Satie wants to know about itself. So, and in fact, it is the Sati that at birth, controls the way the body learns, and it does it in a way that the body reflects what the Sati wants to manifest in this world in order to know itself. You see, it's a much more sophisticated thing. It's not, oh, the ego, bad ego, let's get rid of the ego. No, I mean, we need the ego. But the ego needs to wake up and realize that it is part of a vaster being, and realize that if the ego works together with the Sati, we are done sooner with the job of understanding what we are here to find out about ourselves. You see,
We're going to have to close in a minute, but do you see, and when you talked about the Satie, and do you think, I mean, is there a likelihood that we're developing new kind of species as Saties? I mean, evidently that are not corporal, or evolving in a different way, or complement us, or is that, I mean, how do you see that?
John, the field does not exist in space and time. It's not
I know
who
that.
we
No,
are.
I'm granting that.
So,
Yeah, I'm not.
so
Yeah.
therefore, once the field has achieved the self-learning that we are here to do in our interaction in this chaotic reality, more or less chaotic reality, and has learned what it wanted to learn, it doesn't need to to come back in this kind of world, with a body like like our body. There may be many other, you know, there may be all kinds of different bodies that are more suitable for the next level of understanding that we can have once once this Satie that we are has done all that is necessary with this type of bodies that we have here. And I think that we are close. I yeah.
But so you said so there. If are you assuming that there may be other kinds of bodies? I mean, I heard you talk earlier, and that they're not apparent to us, and
Well,
so what we
how
see.
many bodies are in the ecosystem? I mean, from a single cell to hundreds of millions of species, for Christ's sake. I mean, and everyone is connected to a field that wants to know, wants to find out, wants to learn. So, the entire ecosystem of the earth is the body of some higher being that uses the entire ecosystem of the earth to learn lessons that go way beyond what we are here to learn. So I see this in a, there are, is a sort of a hierarchy, but it's not a hierarchy in the sense that they are separate levels. We are all interconnected. One is holistic. One is not made of separable parts. And that's by the way, that's exactly what quantum physics is saying. The entanglement of all the particles with each other, the fields with each other, is exactly what it takes to be able to say that the universe that we know is holistic. And it took 80 years to be sure that there was entanglement, since the first discovery that it was something like entanglement that Schrödinger did, and Einstein wrote a famous paper that kind of made it clear what was the problem. And so now we know that everything is interconnected, and therefore, even if there are many hierarchies, each level of the hierarchy is interconnected with the other levels, and so there is a continuing flow of meaning between fields, because that's the meaning, is the currency of the spiritual reality, where classical information is the currency of the material reality, and quantum information, qualia, the currency of the mental reality. So with this view, you can understand exactly why we are the way we are. We are the way we are because we are parts whole of the universe, exactly like each cell of my body is a part whole of my body. You see the holographic principle at work?
That's phenomenal. What are there? Is there any other point that we have not covered that you would like to really a point you would like to emphasize and for this particular
About
audience?
50 more points.
Well,
This thing connects things in so many ways that I would have never imagined 10 years ago. But now you can see connections everywhere, and you see I see things that before where they seem to be separate, but now you see that everything is one, and you see it just by this model that I'm proposing, which really explains why quantum physics must be that way, is illustrate the unity that exists in the universe, and is a step forward for us to justify being kind to each other, instead of having the survival of the fittest that justifies being unkind with each other.
Well, do you think that becomes known? I mean, we have a scientific basis for having a kindness and there's a science of kindness. We can actually start to make those
Of
distinctions and
course,
build institutions. Okay, that's okay.
of
Yeah, yeah,
course. I mean,
yeah.
if I'm a part whole,
Oh, oh, oh
to know myself,
yeah.
I need to know you like myself. And for you to know yourself, you need to know yourself. You need to know me like yourself. And so that means that the good that I do to you will return to me, and the bad that I do to you will return to me. That's what it means. So you justify being kind and being and cooperating and working together instead of justifying shooting each other, because the purpose of life is the survival of the fittest, which is the most stupid thing that I've ever heard.
Well, and to that point, I mean, look, our current political social context is predicated and more on that notion. I mean, it's a predator prey mentality that's taken over, and an economic system that's functioning.
Everything is based on competition. Our society is based on competition, justified by that principle, which is justified by observing only the things that justify that principle. You only see the stuff that you want to see, because the stuff that go against the principle you don't want to see. I mean, that's what's going on. I mean, how many examples do we have that there is something beyond death, like the near-death experiences? There are millions of people that have had near-death experiences, and they all say essentially the same thing. Do you think that scientists want that world? No. And so, if that's not evidence, because if you cannot repeat it in a laboratory, but you told us, dear scientists, that the quantum state of a field cannot be reproduced. So you already have discovered that there are things in the world, in the physics, that cannot be reproduced in a laboratory. Ha ha. You see? No. But that's another thing. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay. I mean,
But but
this
but
is the kind
but
of
what you're
argument they go.
But what you're saying now, to me, provides a scientific basis for things we intuitively know and metaphorically we know that we can translate it as a science into a technology, into a way that can be observed and understood in a way that we couldn't before.
That's
And
right. That's exactly the point.
would you agree with that? Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
And
that's why I'm
yeah.
doing this, because now you can understand it. If you want, I mean, if you are open, how can you say that you don't see this? I mean, it's that you don't want. If you don't want this world, well, then we continue to do what we have always done. But don't tell me that it's because there is no explanation. You don't want the explanation because you want your own explanation, and not the explanation that is, up clearly in front of our eyes.
Well, I know from my own experience in doing it. I was interested in cybernetics and I was interested in intentional systems and I had intuitions that the reductionism that we saw in the science was not correct. But you were totally ostracized for that. You couldn't do that. But now that's changing. I mean, it is changing, and it's because the scientific evidence is getting stronger, and this way of explaining things is more powerful and has greater impact. And so the explanatory powers of this old reduction is reduced and contained, and now what the kind of things that you're doing could translate into much more powerful ways of organizing society and everything on a science basis. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. That's my hope.
Mine too.
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you're living it and you're doing it, and that's what and that's what that's what you have to do, right? That's
Yeah,
you don't have much
yeah.
more of a choice. It's who it's manifesting
No,
yourself,
I
and
had I could choose not to do it, but again, what does it mean
would you?
free will, right? What does it mean free will? I mean, it doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want. I mean, in fact, the ultimate free will is to do the will of one, which is not free
Yes,
will
that's
because
right.
one is the will of one is what one is. So who cares? The
And,
free will only makes sense when you have more than one entity that interacting. So now the free will makes sense at the level of the Saties, but not at the level of one. But once you are evolve at the point where you are partaking of one's reality, there is no free will there because you simply know what to do. But that's the utmost freedom. You go you don't
well,
have anything that goes against yourself, right? So you go with it. You are yourself. You express
right.
yourself
That's
completely. Is the ultimate
I
free
agree.
will. But that would be no, that's not free will. That's it's not determinism. The alternative is determinism. Determinism means that you know ahead of time what will happen, and this is not the case.
I agree. I
There are
agree.
no laws. That's why the collapse of the wave function is non-algorithmic. Is a pure randomness, non-algorithmic randomness, meaning no laws. There cannot be any law. Otherwise, it would not be free will.
Yeah.
It would be
Right.
following a law.
So what other? I mean, do you see other physicists sharing your point of view, or biologists? Do you see a growing school and experiments doing developing and sort of the being able to
There are
bring this
all kinds
into
of
the
things.
broader?
Yeah, there are all kinds of things now that are beginning to move and experiments and ways to I mean, I also would like to find ways in which we can help people that are ready, that want to understand, to have experiences, direct experiences of consciousness, because that's the only way to know is to actually, if I describe the taste of food and you never tasted that food, you can read my report all you want. You will never be able to, to understand that taste of the food unless you have a little bite of that food that I'm talking about. That's how we know. We know by becoming what we know. We know by living the stuff that we know. That's how one knows. He knows itself by living itself through us and through, you know,
No,
gazillions of forms of life, you see.
I concur. Well, that's rediscovering some older wisdom. I mean, so the traditional, I mean, it's almost an animistic notion of the connectivity and being able to be receptive to experiences that you cannot simply explain, reduce away. It's just like, oh, I may not be able to explain this, but I experienced this, and it is an interior truth to me. And that used to be, rationality would say you can't do that. You didn't experiment. You have to
Yeah,
dispense with that, and that's been what we've been conditioned to do in the Western world, at least. Um, and now we're starting to change that from the inside, from the science, from what I hear you saying.
yeah.
No,
We have two aspects: the rationality, which is the way to deal with symbols, which is perfectly fine, and then we have the intuition that deals with meaning. And we need both.
right.
We don't need one or the
Absolutely.
other. The spiritual
I
people
agree.
that don't want to do science or think that matter is a bad thing, they are as wrong as the scientisms. The people that believe in scientism, which is another religion, where there is nothing in the intuition. The intuition is bad because it deceives you. You need both. You need both. In fact, we need three things: body, mind, and spirit. Classical information, quantum information, and meaning. There you go.
I concur. Well, I really appreciate your taking the time to explain this and your enthusiasm and your investment in this. I think it's extremely important. I mean that's sort of how we're approaching things here. So I really appreciate the depth of which you pursued this, and both on an intellectual and a personal way. So
Well,
Thank you.
because they are one and the same. They cannot be separated. That's the whole point.